he would be in one side of the house studying the New Testament. I'd be in the other side of the house studying the Torah. And then we'd meet in the afternoon in the kitchen where we would, eat and talk and drink, and we would kind of go at each other. He would try to tell me what his point of view was from what he was learning. I would do the same thing with mine. After a few sessions like this, I realized I couldn't keep up with him because he'd been doing this already for quite a while.
Okay, you guys, we have a fantastic show. Welcome to Israel News Talk Radio. I'm Rod Bryant, along with the actual host of the show, Tamar Yonah. Really so happy to have this guest on. This is going to be our Purim Holiday Special. And what a great subject matter to be talking about today. How would you like to hang out with Bob Dylan, known as Bobby Zimmerman, for over 50 years? I mean, what a great adventure. There's a book that's tied to this. Lou Kemp has written this book, and he talks about his meeting with Bob Dylan when they were kids and how close and a trusted relationship they had with each other. And this book is called Dylan and Me. If you want to get a chance, you'll be able to order it. I'm sure you probably could get it on Amazon or many other different sources. But the question is what is it like being on the road with Dylan and music tours and hanging out and partying and meeting such great artists as Cher and Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell and Bruce Springsteen and Ringo Starr? I mean, just go on and on. So we're going to have a great show lined up for you. And Louis, thanks for joining us today. Tomorrow, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Rod. All right. So, Louis, it's really a pleasure to have you on the show. Usually we cover politics and a lot of, dirty issues. And it's so nice to be able to have a nice, happy Purim special where we can lighten up a little bit and do something more fun. So you wrote this book again called Dylan and Me. And I must say, everybody who's thinking about buying it, it was a very easy and entertaining read. I recommend it. And I want to start at the beginning for our listeners who don't have your book yet. And that is when you were a kid, you were 12 years old. It was 1953. You were in a summer camp in Wisconsin when you first met Bob Dylan, or at that time, the name he was born with was Bobby Zimmerman, and you became close friends. Tell us about how you first met him and what attracted you to him that you wanted to be friends, because somebody with a guitar might be nerdy. I mean, I know some of the girls were laughing, thinking that he was going to be some big star, and they kind of like laughed, but he knew. So tell us all about that.
So we met at a camp called Herzl Camp in northern Wisconsin. It was a co-educational Zionist Jewish camp. And as it turned out, Bobby and another friend of mine and his, Larry Keegan, were all in the same cabin. And we hit it off right away because we were like, the mavericks, the troublemakers, the pranksters, at the camp. So we had that in common. And I talk about some of the things we did in the book, the unconventional things, but we were the unconformists. Like, for instance, if the concerts would say you have to be at arts and crafts at 11 o'clock, one of us would say, I don't want to do that. So we'd take off and go do something else, And of course, we always get in some sort of trouble for doing that. But Bobby always has guitar with him. And from the beginning, he told us that he was going to be a rock and roll star. And he said it so many times, I finally believed him. And of course, he went far beyond that. Any award you can imagine, he's won, including the Nobel Prize in Literature. But at camp, we were just kids, running those fun kids. And but we went to this camp for 5 years in a row because it was really an experience that had a big impact on us. We were from northern Minnesota, which I've been closer to the Canadian border, and not so many Jews up there. The biggest population of Jews was in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, where most of the kids came from. So in northern Minnesota, it's a different breed. It's it's not as sophisticated, so to speak. The kid, more down home people, hardworking. So we were a little bit different than some of the Minneapolis kids, but we kind of shined in the fact that we didn't take any shit and we weren't afraid to do our thing. They were more conformist.
So you say that you were both Jewish, you were in a Jewish camp, you had a Jewish identity, both of you. And I want to ask you though, somewhere along the line, Bobby Zimmerman changed his name to Bob Dylan. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, that happened when he went away to college, when he went down to Minneapolis to go to college. And he wasn't keen on going to college, but his parents insisted that he go to college. Nice Jewish boys have to go to college back then. So, but his mission was, he was excited to go to Minneapolis because big town, big music scene. And so he agreed to do whatever it took to get to Minneapolis. And he actually stayed at a Jewish fraternity for the first 9 months, where his cousin had been the president, and so they set him up to stay there. But he was over in Dinkytown every day. Dinkytown was like a bohemian area of Minneapolis adjacent to the campus, where they, back in the day, they had the coffee houses there. And he would go there and hang out with other like-minded musicians over there. And that's where he actually grew. That's where he learned about Jack Kerouac and all these different, beat things that were going on in the country at the time. You're talking 1959 now. And so he really grew there musically and intellectually. It wasn't uncommon for him to be coming back to the Sammy house at like 8, 9 in the morning when the other kids were just getting ready to go to college. So he'd be up all night playing in the coffee houses and absorbing this bohemian scene. It was during that time that he changed his name to Bob Dylan.
How did he decide on that name?
I never really asked him that. There's been a lot of conjecture that, he was reading Dylan Thomas, the poet at the time, and that may have had an influence on him, but I don't know for sure. So
when you were in college at that time, was it still the beatniks, or was it already getting into the hippie stage?
Well, so we're talking 1959. So that's when, rock and roll was happening. And that had a big influence on Bobby. But when he went down to the cities, he got exposed to Woody Guthrie and folk music, and that had a big influence on him.
Right. And folk music really wasn't that big at that time.
Well, it was emerging. And so he got into that scene. And that had, and he just kept going, of course. But at that time, that's what he was focused on.
All right. Now, your father had his own fish company, Alaskan fish. He would get salmon, all these things like that. And he died. And you were there to pick up the pieces and run the company. But yet, at the same time, you were going on tour with Bob Dylan. Explain to our listeners how all of that happened.
Yeah, so my family was in the fish business out Lake Superior, which is the largest lake in the world, one of the Great Lakes. And my father got sick my last semester in college, so I came back early and I worked with him for a couple of years and before he passed away. I actually took the company up to Alaska about 4 or 5 years later and expanded it up there. But so I had this business. He had trained me, ever since I was a kid. I would go down there and, pack fish and listen on the phone while he talked. So I was pretty well prepared for it. I didn't expect him to pass so soon, but I had 2 good years with him full time. So I was running this business, and Bobby and I would just hang out together. And at some point, he was going on a tour in 1974, and he said, "Do you want to come and hang out with me?" So I did. With Bob, tour 74 was Bob and the band. And so I really got an eyeful of what it was like in that world. They had, a private jet, go from city to city. It was pretty interesting, big auditoriums. About a year and a half later, he said to me, "I want to do a different sort of tour. I want to do an unconventional tour. I want to travel in campers, small cities, small halls, out of the way places. I want it to be like a carnival. I want to bring a lot of people with. I don't want it just to be me. I want to put like a old-fashioned musical show together." And he said, "I talked to some producers in New York when I was there, and they told me I'm too big for that. I can't do that. I got to do, jets and limousines and 60,000 seat auditoriums and Madison Square Garden, all that stuff that he did in 74. He said, "But I don't want to do that anymore." So he explained to me what he wanted with this idea he had. And he said to me, "So what do you think?" I said, "Yeah, that's cool. I like it." He said, "Okay, I want you to produce it." I said, "Produce it? I'm a fish guy. I'm not a music guy." He says, "You're a successful businessman. If you can sell fish, you can sell tickets." That was his line. And so we went back and forth, and finally, I agreed to do it. And like they say, the rest is history. It turned out to be a epic tour.
I don't know why, but one of my favorite parts of your book was when you were talking about how you had to deal with the head of the record label to get them to fund this trip. And you did something where you really turned the tables on him. Why don't you tell our listeners about that?
So I was talking to Bob one day. We were in New York rehearsing. They were rehearsing. We were doing the pre-tour preparations prior to going out. And so I said to Bob, I said, and he had decided he wanted to shoot a movie of the tour at the same time, which increased our expenses considerably from what we had originally anticipated. I said, we got a pretty big overhead here now. I said, I think I'll go up to Columbia Records, which was his label, and I'll talk to the president there and see if I can get them to kick in some promotional money, because they're going to do very well. Once a top artist goes out on a tour, they sell a lot more records. There's a lot more publicity and tumult and everything. So Bob said, "Well, you can do that if you want." He said, "I don't know if they do that sort of thing." I said, "Well, I'm going to give it a try." So I got a hold of the lady that ran his office and had the relations with Columbia, and I told her what I wanted to do. She said, "Oh, save your time. They're not going to give you anything. I've tried it before. They won't support tours." I said, "Well, give me his name and number and I'll give it a shot." She said, "Okay, you're wasting your time." But so she gives me the number. I called the number. His name was Walter Yetnikoff. He was the biggest guy in the music business, president of Columbia Records, which was the record company worldwide. And I said to the lady that answered the phone, I said, "My name's Lou Kemp. I'm Bob Dylan's friend. He's going out on tour that I'm producing. I want to meet with Walter and coordinate with Columbia so that you guys can have the stores in the areas that he's going to go stocked and do your own promotional thing." She said, "Well, let me tell Mr. Yetnikoff and I'll get back to you." She called me back within 30 minutes and said, "Mr. Yetnikoff said he'd be pleased to meet with you. When do you want to come?" I said, "I'll be there tomorrow." So I went to they call it the Black Rock, this building in Manhattan, all black granite where Columbia had their headquarters. And so I go there. He was very friendly, and I told him the whole concept, what we were going to do and everything. And he's so excited. "That's so Bobby. That's so Bob Dylan. That's so unconventional. That's so brilliant." Nobody had ever done anything like that before, of the nature. And we had Joan Baez. We had, we had a 4 or 5 hour show. It wasn't just Bob going out for an hour and a half like people do now. So he was all excited. So So I said to him at a point, I said, Walter, I'm shooting a movie. We're going to need some promotional help from Columbia. And I needed to contribute $100,000, to offset some of the cost. And you remember, this was 1975. $100,000 in 1975 was like $500,000 now. It was real money, big bucks. Right. So right away, the smile comes off his face. He wasn't so happy anymore. And he says to me, "Oh, we don't do that." He said, if we did that for Bob, we'd have to do that for everybody. I said, well, that's too bad, Walter, because if you're not going to support and be a partner with Bob on this effort of his and groundbreaking tour, I can't cooperate with you. I can't give you any tickets for your people. I'm not even going to give you the itinerary. So you guys just won't be involved at all. And he starts screaming at me. He says, "You can't do that. We'll be embarrassed. We have to have tickets for the record stores, for the DJs." That's how they did it back in the day. The DJs would get tickets and they would talk about it and they'd give them away on the air. And then the record stores guys, would stock the stores with albums and they had to have tickets. I said, well, that's too bad. That's not my problem. Maybe you could score some tickets on the street. And I turn around and I start walking for the door, hoping he'd call me back, but I realized if I wasn't tough on him, I wouldn't get anything for Bob. So I'm walking towards the door and he screams out, "Okay, stop, come back. We'll give you the $100,000. I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "I want it at Bob's office tomorrow morning." He said, "It'll be there." And it was. So, I mean, looking back, that was, it's kind of a gutsy move, but the advantage I had was I was a businessman. I wasn't a music guy, and I wasn't representing 5 or 10 other artists like most managers do. So I wouldn't have to go back in front of him and be in a position of needing his blessing. I could be as tough as I had to be to get what I needed for Bob, and he knew that too.
He did. On this tour where you had all of these hip, cool, they're not really rock stars, but the celebrities of music, the folk music, etc. He was with a lot of big names. And so what I'd like to do is kind of do a lightning rod with you. And I'm just going to say a name and I'd like you to make a remark or share something about them that maybe we don't know, or a funny experience that happened, whatever. So let's start out with Cher. Cher, you were hanging out with her and her boyfriend at that time. Tell us a little bit about her.
Yeah, so her boyfriend at that time was David Geffen, who turns out to be now one of the richest people in the world. And he owned the record company that Bob was doing some things with at that time. And so they came to a lot of the shows and we hung out with them a lot. I like Cher a lot. She was great. She was funny, fun, down to earth, good people.
Okay. Marlon Brando.
So Marlon, that's an interesting story. I met Marlon on my own, actually, not through Bob. Long story short, he wanted to get his son Christian out of LA because hanging out the fast crowd, Hollywood kids whose parents were famous like Marlon, and he was worried he was going to get in trouble because they were drinking and doing who knows what. So he reached out to a mutual friend of ours, Elena Caliantes, who's an actress, and he said to her, "Do you know any real people, not showbiz people?" Marlon was anti-showbiz. He wasn't in that crowd. He didn't like that. He liked just hang out with real people, like he would say, that can hire my son and take him out of LA and he can have a real job. She said, "Well, I know this guy who's in the seafood business in Alaska, and he's not a Hollywood guy." "Oh, Alaska," Marlon said, "that's perfect. Let's send him to Alaska." So long story short is I met with Marlon and I hired this kid and we sent him to Alaska, and Marlon and I became friends that way. I like Marlon a lot.
Okay. Joan Baez.
Joan Baez, she was the ultimate do-gooder. I mean, she was always for every underdog, and she was one of the original founders of Amnesty International, which to this day is out there, supposedly helping people. Controversial now, but Joan was always for the underdog, and of course she had this amazing voice, and she had a great sense of humor too. In the book, I talk about the story where Joan and I got into a food fight in a Chinese restaurant in Duluth, Minnesota, where she and Bob and we all went there for a ski trip. So yeah, she was great.
I know you write a lot about her in your book. I could tell that you had a lot of appreciation for her. Ringo Starr.
Well, I mean, I met some of the Beatles, different. They would all come to. A lot of them came to the shows. Bob was close with George Harrison, so we hung out with him a fair amount, and Ringo came to the shows, and McCartney came to the shows. All I can say is that they were nice guys.
What do you know about the Beatles? Because they were gods in the 60s. What do you know about them that you want to share with everybody else?
All I can say is Bob had a big influence on them, and they all looked up to him, and he was ahead of them, and so they were influenced by his music, and George Harrison thought he was, that Bob was like, there's nobody like him, and there wasn't, in the music business. So all I can say is that my interaction with them was when Bob was around, they were all very humble, because Bob was like the musician's musician. They all looked up to him, and they were all influenced by him.
All right. See, you're at home. There's family life, and it's good. All right. Well, one of my favorites, Joni Mitchell. I love her, or I loved her, I should say.
Well, Joni and I stayed friends for years. We're still friends. She went through some health problems, but up until this pandemic, I used to go to her house every 3-4 weeks and hang out with her. And there's some stories in the book about Joni. Joni, is an amazing talent. The songs that she's written have had a big influence on millions of people. And she's funny and down to earth, and just she's from Canada, just like a regular person. She's not affected by her fame.
Right. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and a special emphasis on Crosby because I think that Joni Mitchell and him had a thing going.
Yeah, so I didn't have too much contact with them. The only one there's a story in the book about they were on tour one time and they were in Minneapolis, and Bobby said, let's go. You want to come with me tonight? I'm going to the concert. I said, sure. So we went, and afterwards we were back at the hotel with him, and Stephen Stills, I don't know what he was high on, but he was flying high, and Bobby tells him, I just written some new songs, and he said, well, I'd like to hear them. And so Bobby played a few. We went into a room one of the bedrooms off the suite, and Bobby was playing some of these new songs before anybody had heard them. And he's playing the song "Idiot Wind," which is a very famous song now. And Stills was very paranoid, and he screams out, "Why did you write that song about me?" I'm sure he was under the influence of something that made him more paranoid. And Bobby said, it's not about you. And so he actually kind of got real close to Bobby where he was saying they screamed it out, and I had to get in between and push him away. But, stuff like that would always happen.
You did a lot of damage control actually on that tour and other times with Bob Dylan. All right, let's go past some of these names. I want to ask you about the scene that you were in, because you were talking about how Stills was very high. This was, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. My impression from your book, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that you weren't into at least the alcohol part. I don't know. Were you into the drugs and alcohol like the others?
None of it. I never drank. I never smoked. Wasn't into drugs. I didn't do any of that stuff. And but I was, obviously around it when I was in that scene, because it seems like those people, a lot of them, not all of them, but some of them, indulged excessively.
And was that hard for you to be with a group of people who were always doing this, and you were the guy that was out of
No,
it?
because to be quite honest with you, even my regular friends back in Minnesota, they all drank a lot and they all smoked. Never had any influence on me. I was always the designated driver,
Mhm.
and so this came easy for me.
And then, so why didn't you do it though?
I didn't need it. I didn't like it. It wasn't something that appealed to me.
That's very interesting and encouraging as well. Okay. I mean, I remember when I was in the LA area, I went to a party with my sister and they were doing some Coke there. And they asked me if I wanted, and I also didn't take drugs. I didn't do any of that stuff. And I said, no, I'll just take a 7-Up. Just, because you want something to drink also. And they said, would you like something harder, like a Coke? They're like laughing at me because, I wasn't even taking a Coca-Cola. I was drinking the 7-Up, but okay. You were with Bobby. Sometimes he would get drunk. He would get out of control. There was one story you were talking about in your book where you were woken up at night because he ran out to some van or the bus and he was going to drive himself somewhere while he was under the influence. And again, you were there to do damage control. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was on Rolling Thunder. And when we were getting ready to leave New York and go up closer to Cape Cod, where we were going to, the tour opened in Plymouth, Mass. So we were going to stage up there for a week and do some practicing. And we were supposed to leave, I think, at 10 o'clock in the morning. And he had a camper that he would travel in, and the rest of the tour was in buses. And I had gone to sleep, and all of a sudden there's a pounding on my door. One of the guys in the tour said, Louie, you got to come right now. Bob wants to leave now, and he wants to drive. And they, when I left those guys about 12 o'clock, they were in the bar partying, and so I said, I'm gonna go get some sleep. So I go downstairs, I'm half dressed, putting my shirt on while I'm in the elevator and no shoes, and pull my pants up, and there was Bobby behind the wheel of the camper, and one of the guys who I had signed to him to look after him, stay with him, Gary, was saying, Louie, Bob wants to drive the camper, he wants to leave now. And so I started talking to Bob, and I could tell he had a few drinks, and I didn't think it was a good idea for him to be driving. And I said, Bob, you want to wait and go with everybody else? He said, no, I want to go now. So, okay, that's not a problem. I said, you can go now if you want, but Gary's going to have to drive. He said, no, I want to drive. I said, well, you've had a few drinks, and I can't let you do that. He said, you can't tell me what to do. I said, yeah, I can, because, that's why I'm here. I'm here to look out for you and cover your back, and this isn't a good idea. So he says to me, he says, you'll never work in rock and roll again. I said, I don't give a shit. I got my own business. I'm just doing this as a favor for you. I said, and I'm not going to let you drive. So finally, he saw I wasn't going to back down, and he agreed to let Gary drive. And I said to Gary, make sure you drive him all the way up there, or otherwise I'm going to kill you. I don't want him driving. And he said, okay, Louie, okay, Louie. And so they go, and I watched the van go, and then they turn around the corner and say, okay, everything's under control. I'll go back to sleep. I find out the next day when I get up there to the Cape, they got around the corner, and Bob says, pull over. And he says, okay, I'm driving. And Gary said, Bob, Louie's going to kill me. He tried to kick him out of the van. He said, go. I'm going to go by myself. He said, Louis will kill me. He said, oh, you can come with me. I'm driving. And he did. And he drove up there. That was very unusual. He usually didn't get like that, but that one occasion, is what happened. But good natured though.
You both eventually got married. Bobby got married first. He had kids. He invited you over to his house, and you met his wife for the first time and his children. Tell us a little bit about who he married and why. Usually rock stars, it's a burden to have a family.
No, but you got to remember, he comes from a middle class, nice Jewish family, northern Minnesota. Family is very important to him and them and all of us. And he had those values, comes from a large extended family. And, he had those solid values. And so an opportunity came that the time that he felt was right, he got married and had a bunch of kids, and that's what he wanted. And eventually I did the same thing.
Was she Jewish?
Oh, yeah.
That's rare.
Well,
And
God, she was, and a nice Jewish lady, and his kids all had bar mitzvahs and good stuff.
Interesting. And did you wonder why you weren't invited to his wedding?
So he got married. There was a 10-year period from the time he left Minnesota and became very famous, and that I didn't see him. I would see his mother and pass messages back and forth back in Minnesota. But during that period, we weren't in direct contact.
Mm-hmm. I see. So, tell us a little bit about you. So, years passed, and you finally tied the knot, and it was in a different way than most people would, met their future wives, etc. Tell our listeners about that.
Well, there's a whole background to that, but I became observant, and so I got married in an Orthodox ceremony in my house in Duluth, Minnesota, and Bobby was my best man as it was, and thank God, the background to that, which could be interesting to your listeners, is that him and I were living in a house in Brentwood, California together that he had rented, and he invited me to stay there with him, and we did that for 3 years. It was during a period in his life when he was going through some experimentation. He was studying the New Testament. And so he was flirting with, well, he was involved in that. And I went, took a trip back to Minnesota to see my mother. And I met a Chabad rabbi, as it turns out, very famous Chabad rabbi, Rabbi Manis Friedman, who's a world-class Torah scholar and lecturer. And long story short, I studied with him back there for about 3 weeks. And at the end of the 3 weeks, he said to me, so if you look in the mirror, you might think you're the same person, but there's no way you can be the same person on the inside after having studied Torah with me for 3 weeks. All day long, and that night we talked more. He said, you're right. He says, so he says to me, what are you going to do about it? I said, do about it? I don't know. I haven't thought about that. He said, well, there are 613 commandments. I said, oh, Rabbi, you got to stop. You got to know who you're talking to. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, without any Jewish education. The only reason I know about the 10 commandments is because of the movie, and I can't even keep them. So he stopped, and he started stroking his beard, sat there for about a minute, stroking his beard, didn't say a word, it was kind of eerie. And then he says to me, well, there's 5 commandments. He said, when I met you at the first time I met you, you told me you knew you were writing up a big tab with God for all your good fortune. And you asked me how you could start paying them back. Well, this is how you can start paying back on that tab that you're writing up, that you have read up. I said, okay, what is it? So he tells me these 5 commandments. He explains them out to me on multiple levels, face value, mystical, religious. And then he stops talking, doesn't say anything. And I was thinking about all the things he told me, these commandments, it's all new stuff to me. And then he says to me, so what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to do it. He said, when do you want to start? I said, right now. Now, it was already 10 o'clock at night. He said, okay, come back tomorrow morning and I'll set you up. So I went back to the Chabad house the next morning. He had a tefillin for me. He had tzitzis for me, book about kosher and Shabbos. And, I walked out there like this, and that was it. Never turned back, and I became observant on the spot. And when I got back to Brentwood, to the house where I was living with Bobby, I said, oh, by the way, Bob, I'm observant now. I keep kosher, I keep Shabbos. He looked at me like, what? A month ago you weren't doing that. So I explained to him everything what happened. And so it was an interesting dynamics in the house after that. He would be in one side of the house studying the New Testament. I'd be in the other side of the house studying the Torah. And then we'd meet in the afternoon in the kitchen where we would, eat and talk and drink and not hard stuff, water and milk. And we would kind of go at each other, he would try to tell me what his point of view was from what he was learning. I would do the same thing with mine. After a few sessions like this, I realized I couldn't keep up with him because he'd been doing this already for quite a while, and he'd throw stuff at me that I couldn't counter. So I went in another room after one of these sessions. I called my rabbi and I said, Rabbi, I have a Jewish friend I live with. He's studying the New Testament. I can't counter the things he says. If I fly you out here, will you meet with him and talk to him about Judaism and Torah? He says, sure, whatever you want. He says, okay, I'll get back to you. So the next day I said to Bobby, Bobby, my rabbi is going to be here next week. Would you like to meet with him? He said, sure, bring him over to the house. So I called Manas. I said, okay, next week. I set up a schedule with him. I got him a ticket. I picked him up at the airport. I brought him back to the house, and they got along great. And that was the beginning of the process of getting Bobby back to the religion of his ancestors. I took him to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I introduced him to a lot of cool Orthodox guys that he liked, and other rabbis, and eventually he,
Okay, let me just recap very quickly. So Rabbi Manis Friedman, he's a very popular Chabad rabbi. You can find him on YouTube giving lots of different lectures about Judaism and Jewish life, etc. He's very entertaining as well. He's a very good speaker. And so you're saying that you invited him over and he was the one who kind of like was able to answer and counter the New Testament for Bob Dylan, and he left Christianity, because I remember when it came out in the media that he has embraced Christianity, it was shocking for many Jewish people, and a lot of people just it left a very untasteful taste in our mouth, but we never really heard the story how he got out of it. So
you just heard part of it now. So
and he's still out of it? Is he still out of it?
He'll go, even if he's on the road in Jewish holidays, he'll find a Chabad and he'll go to the services, he'll go to Seders. He's very much embraced his Judaism.
So talking about Seders, you write in your book about a Seder that you went to at a synagogue, I believe it was a synagogue, and you kept adding more guests and more guests and more guests. And you always kept it quiet that Bob Dylan was your friend, that he was coming, because I'm imagining because you didn't want the hysteria, you didn't want the attention, he wouldn't like it as well. And you all showed up at a Seder, and you were even with Marlon Brando at the Seder, who's not Jewish. They must have been wondering, what is all this stuff on the table, this matzah, and it was such a long time until you can eat as well, etc. Just briefly tell our listeners about that.
So this was during in the 70s when I was hanging out with Marlon when I come to town. He'd always say to me, let me know when you're coming. So I was staying at the Beverly Wilshire, and he called me and he said, he knew I was in town, and he said, do you want to go out for dinner tonight? I said, Marlon, I'd like to, but Passover starting tonight, I'm going to a Seder. And he got very excited. A Seder, I've always wanted to go to a Seder, he said, can I come with? Well, this was 2 years after The Godfather. How can you say no to The Godfather, right? So
you didn't want to wake up with a horse head in your bed, right?
I don't want to do that stuff. So I said, okay, you really want to come? He said, yeah, I really want to come. I said, okay. I said, come over to the Wilshire at whatever time, 6 o'clock, and we'll go together. So called the synagogue. It was at a Reform synagogue in the Hollywood Hills, was having a public Seder. But not only for their congregation, but for whoever wanted to come. And we found it, and I was going with my sister and a few friends. So called and added. I never use names when I didn't. I said I'm bringing one more person. Didn't say it was Marlon Brando. And
why didn't you? Because it would have prevented all the exasperation on the side of the women who were planning this, and they were getting upset that another guest at the last minute. If you would have told them, I'm bringing Bob Dylan, Marlon Brando, they would have just made it would have been so much easier for you.
Okay, so one of the reasons I was able to stay friends with Bob and Marlon and these other people is I wasn't into that bullshit, name dropping or any of that crap. And to me, they were just my friends, and they wouldn't be comfortable, and I wouldn't be comfortable using their notoriety in that way. So, and they knew that about me, and I knew that they wouldn't be comfortable as well, and that wasn't my nature anyway. So I just said, plus one more, and then Marlon calls me back maybe 45 minutes later. Says, "Louie, I want to bring a friend." I didn't ask who his friend was. I said, okay, bring your friend. And so we had to call back and add another. And they were, at that point, they said, we really don't have any more room. We'll squeeze in one more person, but that's that's it, And I just got some on the screen that said your battery is low here, so I hope we don't get cut off. Yisrael, can you plug this in because my battery's low? Your mother's computer. I'm at my daughter's house.
Oh,
so,
okay.
So that how it went out. Maybe 45 minutes later, Bobby called me and he said, "What are you doing tonight? You want to get together?" I said, well, tonight's the beginning of Passover. So there's a Seder I'm going to. He said, a Seder? Oh, I didn't realize it was already that time. He said, yeah, I want to come too. Sarah and I will come. Can Sarah and I come? I said, sure. I'm not going to say no.
Sarah's his wife.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we had to call back again, and they were pissed, they thought we were really chutzpahdik, and so anyway, they begrudgingly agreed to add two more, and we went to the Seder, and it turns out that Marlon's guest was Dennis Banks, who was a very well-known Indian activist at the time, from Wounded Knee. I don't know if that means anything to you, but there was a whole episode at a reservation in South Dakota called Wounded Knee, confrontation between the federal government and the Indians there, shooting and everything. So he was the leader, and Marlon was very supportive of the Native Americans. He gave a lot of money to their cause. He promoted them. So he was very much involved. So this was a surreal Seder. I mean, on my right side was Bobby, on the left side was Marlon, and you get Dennis Banks, and my sister, Bob's wife, and some other friends. And we were obviously not dressed like everybody else there. We were dressed the way we dress, leather jackets and jeans, and there was about 300 people there. And we had our own table, maybe 20 feet away, 30 feet away from them. So at first they didn't know who these people were. They were actually a little bit concerned, But the rabbi was on a stage looking down on everybody and conducting the Seder. And, having responsive reading from the Haggadah. And it was kind of, Harry and Sam and Esther, all the people he knew from his congregation, to do responsive reading, like you do in a Seder. At some point, he figured out, who was at our table, and he says, "Mr. Brando, would you do us the honor of reading the next passage from the Haggadah?" And Marlon just, big smile on his face. He said, "It'd be my pleasure." And he stood up and he read it like he was on Broadway, doing Shakespeare on Broadway. It was amazing. It was amazing. And everybody was like in awe. First off, to realize that Marlon Brando was there, and then to be treated to this, him, the way he did it. When he was done, everybody started clapping. It was very unusual. You don't see it at a Seder, of course. And it was pretty cool. About 15 minutes later, he says, the rabbi, he said, "Mr. Dillon, would you do us the honor of singing us a song?" Well, I knew he wasn't going to do that. I mean, when Bob's, on his own time, he doesn't want to be doing stuff like that. He doesn't want to be put on the spot. So I leaned over. I was about to say,
Oh, we're losing you. Hope your battery isn't dying. Lou?
Yeah.
I need you. Can you check your battery?
Is it going down?
We're losing you a little bit.
Okay, Ilana. Okay, Yaakov. I need to plug in the battery on Ilana's laptop. It's going down. All right, he'll get the
Okay.
And Bobby sings acoustic version of "Blowing in the Wind." It was unbelievable. It was totally unbelievable. And when it was done, they went wild. They were screaming, yelling, clapping. They couldn't believe. Nobody could believe it. Ilana, the battery's going down.
How many people were at this Seder?
So there was 300 plus people there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big.
It's very big.
Yeah.
Well, they must have been thrilled.
Oh, they were thrilled. Yeah, and the rabbi was thrilled. And the ladies who gave me a hard time came by and thanked me, for bringing my friends, and they were thrilled.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, you grew up as an American Jewish boy in a regular, family in the Midwest, and then you are now in the Hollywood type of scene with celebrities, etc. And you now are raising your own, or you raised your own family. What about your children? Are first of all, are you still Sabbath observant?
Of course.
Okay. And your children, where are they in their spiritual journey?
Okay, so Ilana, just come on the screen here for a second. My daughter Ilana is helping me right now. I wanted to say hello. This.
Oh no, you have to move the chair.
Wait, so we got to move the chair to get this.
So we get to meet the mishpacha now.
You're going to meet Ilana.
Hi, sorry, we're trying to get this computer. Hello.
Hi, Ilana.
Hi.
Shalom.
All right, so Ilana has 4 children, very observant. All my kids are observant, and I've got 6 kids and 8 grandchildren so far.
Wow.
And
Beautiful.
We lead an observant life. We love Israel, and we go there as often as we can.
That's amazing. So I hear, so far, 2 of your children, they're all Hebrew names, Yisrael and Ilana.
Okay, so Yisrael is my grandson. That's Ilana's youngest son. Her older son is Nachman Noam, named after Rabbi Nachman of Breslov fame.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Her other children are Sophia and Frida Adele, named after my mother. My children are, in addition to Ilana, are Aaron, Sarah, Abraham, Rachel, and Elchanan Rubain.
Wow. Amazing. All Hebrew names, and they're all Torah observant. This is really rare and special, I have to say. So what about Bobby? Where is he now in his spiritual journey? Is it important to him, or he's just in retirement? What is he doing now?
No, he's on tour right now as we speak. He does. He's been doing for over 30 years, 90 to 100 concerts a year. Yeah, he's always been very active, and that's what he does. He's still writing songs. New album last year was very much acclaimed and very successful.
You said that all of his kids had bar mitzvahs, all of his boys. Right. Does his Judaism play a part in his life at this stage?
So I'm not going to comment on that. All I can tell you is, he's as Jewish as we are, and he does his own thing. Of course. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you want to talk about his observance, that's fine. At the end of your book, you talk about all of your wonderful memories with him. And I understand you're not so much, what do you say, bekesher? You're not in touch with each other at this stage. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, there's nothing that happened. It's just that we're not in touch like we used to be. We're not in touch at all, actually. And but for 50 years, as outlined in the book, we had great experiences together. It's not easy being Bob Dylan. The whole world's trying to get a piece of you. So that's all it is right now.
Did you send him your book?
I did, and I sent it a couple of months before it came out. I never heard back from him, so no news is good news, but it was all positive, true stories. I'm sure he enjoyed them as well.
All right, so Rod, I'm going to call Rod back in, who's our producer. And Rod, are there any questions at all from any of the listeners?
Yes, we have one from Susan. She says, in 60-minute interview with Ed Bradley, Dylan alluded to having made a Faustian bargain with a demonic entity. I don't know. I've not heard this before. It's a la Robert Johnson. Did Dylan ever share with you these tales about this kind of satanic stuff?
That wasn't satanic, and that's not what he said. I saw that interview.
Okay.
I can't remember the exact question, but his response was, I think Bradley asked him, how were you able to do all this? His volume of work is incredible. And he said, I made a deal with the commander in chief, something like that. And Bradley said, who's the commander or the boss or something like that? And Bradley, who's that? And Bobby points to heaven, he didn't point down to hell. He pointed up to heaven. In other words, with God. And I had asked Bobby on one occasion, I said, how are you able to write these songs? It's amazing. I mean, what he was able to accomplish creatively. And he said, God puts the words into my mind, and I just write them down. I'm just a scribe. He said, all the credit goes to God. And he's always been very humble and direct about that.
It's very inspiring. At this point, there really isn't any other questions. This has been a fantastic interview and actually very inspiring. I really appreciate it. And I think that we all should probably go out and buy the book. Where can we purchase the book? Obviously, Amazon probably. Where else can it be purchased?
It's on Amazon. It's in Barnes & Noble and not any other stores.
You want to give out your website for our listeners as well?
Yeah, dylanandme.com.
Very simple. And one last question I did have for you, and that is, with your whole life that you've experienced, like the wholesome family life, you've experienced the sex, drugs, and rock and roll era, and you have children and even grandchildren now yourself. What is your message to the youth of today with all of your experience?
So I have a saying that I try to lead my life by that I have for a long time. And it kind of is a bottom line saying, and I'll expand on it after I tell you what it is. And it's this: you can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. In other words, this isn't the final show down here. This is just the qualifying matches. And you know, how our neshama is going to
Our soul.
our souls are going to be treated for eternity is going to be determined by the choices we make down here, our actions, the things we do, the things we don't do. So that's how you send it ahead, by being kind, by being generous, by being, hospitable, by being merciful. That's a big thing, to be merciful with other people, to give tzedakah, to give charity. That's how you send it ahead. You can be have millions or billions, and if you don't do those things, you go up there, you're going to be very shocked, surprised, and disappointed, and you're going to be poor, because the only currency that's going to do you any good up there is the mitzvahs that you do down here. So that's my advice to people, to think carefully about the choices they make, with an eye on the big picture, not just what's going on in front of them.
And immediate gratification, like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah,
Right.
that's going to serve you well up there.
Lou Kemp, I want to thank you very much for coming on the Solomon Sword podcast and sharing your experiences with us, letting us get to know a talent like Bob Dylan more, and your wonderful stories that you have, and your whole life journey yourself. And again, the book is called Dylan and Me, and we will put up a link where this show is podcasted, where you can order the book. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Hey everyone, to make sure you can get access to all of our interviews, make sure to hit the subscribe button on both our YouTube and Rumble channels. Your click makes us all stronger. Thanks.